Very good. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. We are excited to have you join us for a bylaws revision webinar. I see a hand is raised already. I think we're just testing things out perhaps, or we have a chat. Great. Good. Well, thank you all for joining. We do appreciate your taking the time to get to know more about our bylaws. On the call this evening in our webinar, we have Dr. Christian Guillaume, our National Vice President for Programming, Kathleen Held, National Vice President for Membership, Megan Miller-Toole, National Vice President for Collegiate Chapters, Chris Dickey, who is our parliamentarian serving us this year, and then I'm Julia Kozicki, General Counsel for the sorority. As you heard, this session is being recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. This is live. Certainly, we appreciate your grace as we are navigating technology, and the closed captioning has been enabled. Can be turned on by clicking the CC button on your screen, I understand. So with that, I'm going to give us a brief agenda and then we will get started. So first of all, welcome again. We're going to do a little bit of discussion about what are the bylaws, how are they changed. We're going to talk about what the revision process is and how the business meeting will go through those changes, or the one big change really. And then we're going to talk about the big changes within the larger revision and have some time for questions. So with that, first thing we're going to talk about a little bit of Bylaws 101. And bylaws are the governing documents of the organization, voted on at convention by our delegates, as many of you know, having been delegates. These changes have been proposed by National Council, some of them following our DEIA committee review of the last 2 years, others following our intended shift to governance. They were presented to the Bylaws Committee February 1, and as you know, they were mailed out to all delegates on April 1st, and they require a 2/3 vote. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris now and talk a little bit more deeply about the bylaws.
Thanks, Julia. Bylaws are really the most important document that your organization adopts, and they deal with the structure of the organization. So it defines who are the members, how do they become members, any obligations of membership that you might have, includes details about the board, the composition of the board, how do they become members of the board, are they elected or appointed, any qualifications for that election, what the duties of the board are, talks about committees, structure of those, how are people become members of committees, and also some details about finances. And then also how are the bylaws amended? So it's pretty much the structure, the bones of the organization. The National Policy Handbook deals more with procedures of how things are carried out and through the organization. So those are the differences between those things. Your national policies are approved by a vote of the National Council and cannot be in conflict with anything in the bylaws, and bylaws can only be adopted by the convention body. So those are the differences between the two. Now, you're going to be considering at this convention a bylaws revision, and a bylaws revision is an extensive rewrite to your bylaws. Instead of just a few changes, amendments here and there, this usually deals with almost things that are in almost every article. And so when it becomes that extensive and some of the things carry over between more than one article, then a bylaws revision is usually presented to the members. And that is the case with the changes that are being proposed this year, because you have about 50 substantive changes, and then there's also some other technical and editorial changes that are also included in this revision. Let's talk about how it will be considered by the voting body. So it's going to be done at the business meeting at the convention. And so this is just like a large chapter meeting. And so the delegates who are defined in your bylaws will be the voting body. And it's around 600 people who will be considering this and voting on it. And so the delegates, the official delegates to the convention, will have designated seating section, and they will have voting devices assigned to them, so be voting by that. And then visitors will be sitting in another section, and they can speak, but only the voting delegates are the ones who vote. And you've been sent a copy of the revision, but there will also be a hard copy in your program book that you'll get when you're at convention. Also, there'll be a screen and projector, so it'll be up on the screen what we're considering at the time. So we want to make sure that everybody's on the same page so they know what we're discussing at the time, because there's a lot of information to know, and we want to keep everybody on the same track. So let's talk about it. The bylaws revision is going to be considered seriatim, which means we'll go through the bylaw revision article by article. And your national president will open up each article to amendment. So she'll start off by saying, are there any amendments to Article 1? And Article 1's pretty basic. It has your name and your founding date, things like that. So might not be any amendments to that. So then we'll move to Article 2, and your national president asks, are there any amendments to Article 2? And so if somebody has something that they'd like to see changed to what's being proposed, they can make an amendment. And so then the convention body will consider the amendment, and then we'll vote on just the amendment to that. And that takes the amendment takes a majority vote to adopt the amendment. We're not adopting the article, just the amendment at that time. And so we'll go through all the articles, and then after we do that, we'll come back around and we'll open up the entire document to amendments so people can skip around. We do that because through the seriatim consideration, you might amend something to Article 12 that might affect something in Article 3. So we might have to go back and fix something in Article 3. So we do that. We have time to do that. And then finally, after we've opened it up to amendments, the whole thing, then there'll be time to debate the merits of the revision. Because basically what your question is going to be is, shall you replace your current bylaws with the revision? And so you can get into discussion on the merits of doing that. And once that is finished, then it'll come down to one vote, and that's the adoption of the revision, either as presented or as amended. And that vote will take a 2/3 vote of the convention body. And so that is how the revision is handled.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.
So we are going to talk now going through some of the big changes that have been proposed as a part of this revision process. So with that bylaws document you got on April 1st, that included a document called Changes and Rationales that detailed many of those substantive changes. And we're going to talk through some of the highlights. We're not going to talk about all of them, but please do review that document so you understand what those things are. If you have questions tonight, certainly use the chat or the Q&A features in Zoom. or you're always welcome to send an email to bylaws@sigmakappa.org. I share that with Larry and Seyfried and with Chris, and so we will get your questions answered. As we think about how delegates should prepare, certainly read the revision proposal and the list of substantive changes. And then if there are, we don't have any chapter officers on tonight, but we do have a couple of ABSs. So we want to make sure our chapters are discussing the changes. Alumni chapters should also be discussing the changes so that you know what the sense of your chapter is as you are coming to vote at convention. But delegates should vote their conscience at the meeting after hearing the discussion of all the people in the business meeting. You should keep your chapter sentiment in mind, but you're not bound to that direction of your chapter when it comes to the convention floor. So with that, we're going to start talking about some of the substantive issues, and we'll start off with Christian talking about the revised purpose statement.
Right, thanks so much, Julia. So the purpose statement. So National Council reviewed the purpose statement in light of our diversity, equity, and inclusion access goals and recommend the new language that you see. So as we go through tonight, we won't read all of the language on the slides, but we'll provide you a little bit of detail of what we will be voting on that slide. So the revised purpose statement was developed with the assistance of focus groups of collegians, alumni, and staff. So what you see is what we will be presenting.
Thanks, Christian. Our next item is a reference to diversity in our membership. And the Article 3, Section 2 statement that was there was adopted in the 2000s. And at that point in time, it's 2008 actually. And in that point in time, we included the word tolerance at the end of the phrase. So at that point in time, it said we recognize the importance of each individual member within an atmosphere of care, tolerance, and respect. And at that time, that was fine. Over the years, that is no longer an acceptable term for us to be using. That is not an acceptable standard for us to be including and wrapping our arms around our members. And so this was actually a proposed bylaw change at the 2020 convention, but because we didn't address those bylaws at that point in time, we have moved it forward to 2022. We are keeping the majority of the phrase with simply taking out the word tolerance to focus on an atmosphere of care and respect, which we think better represents what we expect of all of our members.
Requirements for membership. So this amendment is recognizing the changing landscape for collegiate women, including enrollment at community colleges, which currently the National Panhellenic Conference is considering for possible areas of extension. Additionally, we have collegiate chapters that offer on campuses that offer associate's degree. Students pursuing an associate's degree are considered on those campuses to be fully matriculated. Thus, they're allowed to participate in Panhellenic primary recruitment, but our current bylaws that require a PNM to be pursuing a bachelor's degree eliminate those PNMs pursuing an associate's degree from membership. So this change does align with the National Panhellenic Conference. It also is more inclusive and brings more clarity around those students who are enrolled in special university programs, specifically perhaps certificate seeking programs. This bylaws change also removes the requirement for a written recommendation prior to initiation. National Council believes that this requirement at a minimum is a perceived barrier, if not an actual barrier to access, and is no longer relevant in our membership selection practices. And if we want to go on to changed collegiate vice president of membership to vice president of recruitment. So as we move to governance, currently my role is the National Vice President for Membership. It aligns with the collegiate Vice President for Membership, but every other recruitment facing role in our organization has the title recruitment, whether it is recruitment coordinator, specialized recruitment coordinator, director of recruitment. Even our staff counterparts have the title recruitment specialist. And so this would align the vice president of membership with the recruitment structure of Sigma Kappa. It would also align them with the norms on their campus, where most collegiate chapters use the term vice president of recruitment.
Thanks, Pat. So sticking on the topic of officers. So I will walk us through the addition of the collegiate DEIA chair. So in 2019, National Council appointed a standing work group to engage in meaningful discussions about ways Sigma Kappa can be more inclusive and uphold a culture of belonging where all members are valued, respected, and accepted. This group recommended making the diversity and inclusion chair a required position within our collegiate chapters to prioritize the role and to give chapters ownership of this relevant work. National Council has strongly encouraged this position and has placed the DEIA chair on the membership selection committee. Due to the deferral of all bylaws changes from the 2020 convention, and this might be a theme you hear tonight, National Council is now adding the role as a required chair. Chapters can choose to elevate their DEIA chair to executive council if desired, using the new method outlined in our next slide, bylaws change. A DEIA committee is also added to the list of committees in Article 4B4.
So as Christian mentioned, the previous bylaw that we talked about includes the opportunity to elevate that DEIA chair to executive council. And one of the things we realized is that there is no process in the bylaws with which to do this. We know some of our chapters have been doing it over time, and we've encouraged that behavior as long as they're having great conversations with their volunteer leadership and other leadership, but realized that was not something that we had made an accommodation for in the bylaws. This new piece adds that as a provision to allow chapters, if they wish, to consider and to vote to make a chairperson an executive council member. It does reference National Policy Handbook. So in National Policy Handbook, we will be adding some guidelines and some policies and some mechanisms to make that possible so that chapters can make great decisions and weigh the pros and cons and work with their volunteers and their support team to do what they need to do to represent their chapter well.
Change in alumni chapter officers. So I think we have a couple alumni chapter officers on our call tonight. So walking through this one. So National Council had appointed a task force in 2018 to discuss the alumni chapter experience and make recommendations for improvement. After a year of the work, the task force recommended reducing the number of required officers in alumni chapters. So this proposal and the one following were initially presented for consideration at the 2020 convention, but were withdrawn in light of the changes to the business meeting due to COVID. They are being presented again to support the needs of the modern alumni and alumni chapter operations experience. Changes to National Council roles. So hopefully this is not news to any of you on this call, but in the current National Council structure, named roles as elected officers, National Council members have been focused appropriately on the operational management of their specific areas. With a proposed shift to governance, National Council will be able to focus on organizational strategy and foresight, both in and out of board meetings. Moving away from operational roles will also expand the candidate pool to all Sigma Kappa strategic leaders and will make the role more manageable for today's professional woman. The proposed shift is in alignment with modern nonprofit governance best practices and with more than 2/3 of our NPC sister organizations.
Who is eligible for National Council? Life membership has been included in the initiation fee since 1983, and so it's no longer a concern for service on National Council. The requirement to serve in a National Council volunteer role is being eliminated to open the door to any Sigma Kappa with the skills and experience that would benefit the National Council as determined by the nominating committee. Finally, each entity, so the Sigma Kappa sorority, the Sigma Kappa Foundation, and the National Housing Corporation have all agreed that employees should not be considered for service on an entity board.
Okay, so how will council be elected moving forward? With the shift to governance, the process for the election will require an amendment to explain how election by ballot will operate when a member runs in addition to the slate proposed by the nominating committee. Additionally, the term limits for national council tied previously to service and specific officer roles, so these require reconsideration. The term limits for national president and national vice president for finance remain the same at 2 terms. For the vice president, a lifetime term of 5 years is being proposed. This outer limit on national council service, which actually does not currently exist, ensures that new members are always rotating onto the board. It is also long enough to ensure that a council member can serve, step away, and then serve again if elected, but never for more than 5 total terms in her lifetime.
So as a result of the changing nature of National Council, that means that the duties of National Council members needed to change as well. These 2 portions reflect the changes to the National President and her duties, as well as the National Vice President of Finance and her duties. It describes the strategic nature of those individual roles. It describes the oversight and management. It describes the service and the work that those individuals will do that is different from the work that staff members will do. So it enumerates some of those responsibilities, clarifies some of the separation. The other piece there talks about the change in terms of succession and how things work within the order of operations of National Council. Previously, the National Vice President for Alumni was the second in command to the National President and was intended to serve in her absence if she wasn't able to. In this case, it removes that responsibility, and we have a structure later on to talk about how National Council would address the need to take on the duties of the National President in the event that person wasn't able to continue.
Changes to appointed officers. So these amendments clarify which volunteer roles are considered as appointed officers, clarifies the duties of those officers, and removes the role of archivist, which has not been filled by a volunteer in several years, and is inconsistent with the naming conventions for all other volunteers. Elimination of the archivist role does not prevent the sorority from an appointment of a director of archives as a national volunteer later on down the road if the sorority chooses to do so.
Changes to who can serve on the nominating committee. So this amendment addresses several concerns raised by the DEIA committee review and by current and former nominating committee members. It expands the pool of eligible candidates by including advisory board supervisors, as well as members who have volunteered for the Sigma Kappa Foundation and the National Housing Corporation, and by removing the requirement of attendance at a prior convention. It further explains what constitutes a current volunteer role and clarifies that employees of any Sigma Kappa entity are prohibited from eligibility. And I'd like to pass it to Julia, who has a special announcement about applying for the nominating committee.
Thanks, Kat. Right now is the time to apply for the 2022-2024 nominating committee. There is a link to those applications that will be found in, I believe, your scoop coming out in the next week, and also was found in the letter sent out, coming out tomorrow, about the any changes to the slate. So you will see that link. You can also find it on the website, but anyone who is eligible under the updated bylaw is welcome to apply for the nominating committee no later than May 1st. I see numbers 1 through 3 and or. Amber, the answer to your question is that all 3 must be true. So you have to have served at least 2 years out of the last 10 and currently be volunteering But currently volunteering can mean at the very local level. So you could now you could be a corporation board member, and that would be a local volunteer if you had previously served as a National Housing Corporation Foundation or sorority volunteer 2 of the last 10 years previously, and also not currently be employed. All right, well, certainly consider applying for the nominating committee, and now I will pass it on back to Christian.
Okay, thanks. So keeping in line with nominations, so changes to the nomination timeline. These amendments shorten the timeline for the nomination process, which currently lasts 9 months from the first nomination to election. So this still will provide ample time for the nominating committee to consider and endorse candidates, and time for those not slated to continue to signify their continuing interest in the process.
This article 9, section 2B, talks about the revised duties of National Council members. And I think as we've talked about this shift to what National Council will be, some of the key things we continue to talk about is the need for our National Council to be strategic, to be able to look ahead 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, to be able to be strategic, to oversee the direction of the national organization. These duties also enumerate the responsibilities of selecting, support, and evaluating the chief executive of the sorority, so currently our executive director, view and set the strategic vision, provide fiduciary oversight, so looking over all of the financial components and responsibilities of the organization, really monitor the trends of where sorority membership and sororities are going, where institutions of higher education are going, and where organizations that are nonprofit service kinds of organizations like ours are headed, as well as some of the same traditional duties that National Council has served in the past in terms of voting on things and membership status changes and that sort of thing. This area really lays that out so that those responsibilities are clear in the bylaws.
So we have some changes to our financial committees, which I'll talk about, and they all align together. And it is primarily amending those so that we have the timing of service the same across all 3 in terms of when members serve on those committees. And also those 3 sections currently designate staff members by title. And as our staff structure evolves, we needed to remove specific titles and give flexibility on which staff members serve these committees to the executive director.
The creation of the Personnel Committee. So the Personnel Committee has actually been operating really since the past 6 months or so. Julia's shaking her head, yes. Time just flies when you're having fun here on National Council. And so this codifies the creation of the Personnel Committee as a committee, an official committee of the sorority. So you can see exactly how that makeup looks on the slide, but just as we have other national committees, this adds to that officially in the bylaws in our process as we have been operating this past calendar year.
The Sigma Kappa Foundation has its own governing documents. So upon the recommendation of our parliamentarian and with the agreement of the Sigma Kappa Foundation trustees, references to the Sigma Kappa Foundation will be removed from the bylaws.
Thanks, Kat and Christian and Megan. So at this point, we have been recording, and the overall revision amendment will be considered at National Council as we discussed earlier with Chris. So if you have questions, certainly you're welcome to ask them in the Q&A or in the chat now, or we can you're welcome to send it to bylaws@sigmacappa.org at any point in time. I think that we caught the only question that had been asked from Amber about, Teresa has a hand raised. And I don't know, let's see. Teresa, I think I can allow you to talk. Oh, if you unmute, if you have a question.
I did it by accident. I don't need to raise my hand.
Okay.
Well, it's nice to hear your voice, Teresa, either way.
Well, if there are no other questions, and certainly we appreciate your taking the time this evening to learn all about the proposed revision and the important changes that were included in that. And if you have any questions, please do reach out, bylaws@sigmacappa.org. Ladies, any final words before we close?
Thanks for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time tonight.
I would say there's a lot of questions and things that are coming our way when we get to Denver. So those of you that have been with us, the more that we can debunk, demystify, answer questions on before we get on site, the quicker that business meeting will go. So share that word with your friends, use that bylaws email so we can make sure that everyone feels fully prepared and informed when we get to Denver. But we can't wait to see you there.
Thanks all for your time. We really appreciate your dedication to this process, and we can't wait to see you this summer. This part's going to be great.
Yeah.
So we really look forward to you being here. And again, if you need to process and ask questions later, we totally understand the processing needed sometimes. Please continue to do that. And Julie is a great person to, filter it to all of us, but don't hesitate to reach out to any one of us individually as well. If you have a question, we're happy to answer.
Thanks,
Thank
Rebecca.
you, Julia. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks all. Have a great night, and we will see you soon.
Good night.